Very good. That sort of went quieter for a minute and then people just carried on, didn't they? Welcome in the room, welcome online. I would normally just say good evening, but it is at least credible that there is a good morning and a good afternoon somewhere online as well. Delighted to be here this evening. I am standing in the way of the main act, so I shall be rather brief, but I do need to start with the boring bit, which is obviously the fire procedures. In the event of a fire alarm going off, there are no planned fire drills. We need to exit the building through the door that you will have come through, turn left, and the muster point is by cockpit steps. Good. Very exciting. Good. So, to introduce Matt, I don't want to give you any spoiler alerts. It is the presidential address. He will probably want to tell you quite a lot about himself and other topics, I should say. But just a brief introduction. So Matt was an affiliate member in 1999, and he was reading mechanical engineering at De Montfort University in Leicester. And I'm going to summarise by he spent a good many years supporting young member activities. I've been given a very comprehensive list, but I can assure you, in the Leicester region in particular, he spent many years devoted to supporting the young members' activities. Between 2008 and 2014, Matt was a member of Trustee Board. So he served 2 terms, one of those terms as the under-30 representative and one of those terms as an ordinary member. And again, then, if you look at the list of volunteering that Matt has done at the institution, it is really, really humbling. Anyone that was at the AGM earlier on today will have had the full list. This evening, I'm going to summarise as from 2015 onwards, he spent a vast amount of time and energy on council, on trustee board, and on various other committees. It's really, really humbling, the efforts as a volunteer that he has dedicated to the institution. So really this evening is just about honouring Matt and honouring all those efforts, but I'd like to think that we can actually celebrate the efforts of all our volunteers this evening. We all know that it's absolutely the volunteering effort that powers these institutions. Matt's focus has been very much on those governance committees, playing roles on various boards, trustee board and council in particular. But of course, we have volunteering activity in many, many different guises here, be that through professional reviews, be that through education and outreach, or many of the other opportunities, particularly regions, internationally, you name it. So you're all one of them. I'm just going to hazard that guess. Everyone in the room pretty much has done some of that volunteering effort. So please do see this evening as a celebration of yourselves as well as of Matt. I just want to say as well, we're delighted that we've got other partners in the room as well. You know who you are. I'm looking at you all. You know, from across, in particular, the education and outreach sector, but also across the wider professional engineering institution. And I'm personally really, really gratified by that, because I think, you know, if we step back for a minute, wider society doesn't really particularly differentiate, I would say, between branches of engineering. And I think it's really, really impactful when we all work together. And we do all work together. And we should be doing that collaboration to deliver our mission and your missions, which were usually similar, ours being improving the world through engineering. Without further ado, I would like to leave you to the main event and encourage Matt to join us at the lectern.
Thanks very much, everybody. Thanks for that really warm welcome. All the years I've been standing here, that's probably the warmest welcome I've had by far. It's fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction, Alice. A few things you might have kind of just omitted in terms of 2 things. 1, pedantry. whether it's a LinkedIn profile post or whether it's terms of reference or something in trustee board, I'm normally right there pointing out where we've kind of made a few errors. The flip side of that, of course, is that whilst I'm Alice's favourite pedant in that sense, I'm my wife's probably top 5 least favourite pedants. So it just goes to show there's a kind of a time and a place for that kind of thing. And speaking of my good wife, Helen, actually the Young Members is where we met. She was the West Midlands representative, I was the East Midlands representative, and it's not really a membership benefit we advertise. And don't worry, whilst we want a secure financial position, we're not about to set up mecmates.com or some kind of dating app or anything like that. Okay. So in terms of being 140th president, of course, it's a very humbling feeling to stand here, to have had the support of all the members throughout the 18 years that I've been on trustee board and council. And I sometimes find that humble can be a word that's kind of a little bit overused, not really kind of explained properly. As you'll judge from the initial introduction that I've just presented, there's kind of one thing I need to explain is the fact that some of my jokes, if you like, or my sense of humour, quite a lot of it's been vetoed out of this, it has to be said. And when you look at the kind of comedians that I've kind of grown up with alongside, you can understand kind of why. So I thought, well, okay, explaining the word humble, who is it that I would choose to kind of explain this? So, of course, uncontroversially, I've decided to go for Ricky Gervais, because, of course, he's got lots of experience of standing in front of people. And at his awards ceremonies, what he would do is he would provide advice to the people that are going to get these awards to say, when your name has been read out, stand up, come and collect your award, maybe say a few words, and then politely exit stage left. Okay? Now, he provided this advice because at that point that person's name has been called out, the person most interested in the fact they've won that award is them. And I sat there thinking, well, actually, that could equally apply to me in my presidency, because I've got pretty good money, actually, I'll put on the fact that I'm probably most interested in being the president, standing here in front of you right here, right now, which, again, is a humbling feeling from my point of view. So, having gone through those slides and the obligatory embarrassing photo of when I was younger and much thinner, an overall structure of this presentation to you this evening. To go through some of my formative years. I won't go through the full list, Alice, don't worry. For anybody who's interested in statistics, there's a few bits on president by numbers. Then it's on to my kind of main focus, which is trust. And I'll look at how that looks from an institution point of view, engineer to engineer, if you like, as well as the wider society and how they view the engineering profession. There's also an interesting YMB initiative that links into our membership proposition and try and make improvements in that sense. And right at the end, there's an element of privilege that kind of affects people, how people trust you and whether they find you trustworthy or not. So I'll touch on that with a bit of a video at the end, which means you don't have to keep on listening to me for quite too much longer. So another embarrassing photo, this time of me in Saudi Arabia, actually, having been born in Nottingham, raised in Leicester, mid-80s, out in Saudi. That's actually where I learnt to ride a bike, of all things. Then, probably about 10 years later, there was an opportunity to live out in India, Bangalore kind of region, and that's where I attended Malia DT International School. Now, one of the plays that the older students provide, they had a different meaning for MAIS, but I won't go into that right here, right now. It's not appropriate. Now, in terms of inspiration, around about the mid-90s, my father got his Chartered Engineer certificate, and I saw it go up in the wall on its plaque, and there was immense kind of pride in it, and I could see the value in it, and that gave me a bit of inspiration. That was the first time I'd really kind of come across the iMechE, if I'm honest, and back then we didn't have the internet as we know it now. Just give me a second. So it wasn't until I got to university, to Montfort University in '99, that Dr. Philip Few encouraged me to become an affiliate member. And I did so. It was free. I was a student. Why wouldn't I? It's something we continue doing today. Now, a couple of years later, I did track down the Leicester Young Members Chair, Dr. Martin Smith. Now, he was in his own words, pushing the limit of what a young member was defined as at the time. He was a chairman of one person on the panel, him. So he latched on to me, and we decided, okay, with a number of people from Alstec, load of graduates, we got them together, and we said, well, okay, we need an inaugural event. What are we going to do for the inaugural event? And you're probably thinking, well, let's go for something big, engineering, technical focus, etc., etc. And those ideas were generated, but lasted about 3 or 4 nanoseconds. It wasn't a brewery tour, which is the kind of typical young member outpost, but we did go to a Jongleurs Comedy Club instead. Now, the interesting story around that is that, as normal, the comedian would go around the tables, kind of making fun of different bits and pieces. That they realised that you'd got this massive table of about 25 young members. Asked us why we were there, we provided an explanation, and he just came out with so what's the biggest thing you've ever designed? Everything went quiet, and I was at the end of the table, and I thought, well, in for a penny, in for a pound. First ever heckle, and I shouted, nuclear reactors. You've never seen a comedian move on to the next table more quickly in your life. And I decided at that point I was going to retire from heckling as well, to keep my 100% success rate. Now, as well as being at Alstec and going through the young members piece, I also met Dr. Paul Carter, their training manager, first ever training manager I had experience to work with, and he was partnered up with Ian Graydon, and together they were putting together the professional development scheme. And over the years, that became like more of an exemplar around some of the universities. And I was lucky enough, had the privilege to be in the first cohort for that. So I was involved, went through and learned a lot from that process. I mentioned Paul because unfortunately we lost Paul last November. And again, it was a privilege to go to his service, to meet his family. They knew Paul, the engineer, Paul the dad, Paul the husband, but didn't really know Paul the training manager. So it was very nice to be able to relay some of the things, benefits that I had from Paul, things I learned from Paul, to show that his legacy kind of lives on through a number of other people, because it's not just me that Paul kind of helped. And I think there's a lot of superlatives you could use for Paul in terms of trust, honesty, dedication, etc. Many, many more you could use, but definitely be sorely missed. So in terms of kind of moving forwards, in terms of getting the getting chartered engineering status, very proud to have got that at the age of 25. It's not necessarily all good news in a sense, because we currently define a young member as somebody who's working towards professional registration, or somebody who's 10 years having got professional registration. So unfortunately, I'm some number of years outside of being classed as a young member. However, Alice, who joined us 4 or 5 years ago, actually is technically still classed as a young member. So it's a bit of an interesting dichotomy that I thought I would share with you. Obviously, I went on to be on the trustee board. The Young Members Board had a rep role for me to kind of sit on there, no voting rights, but ability to influence, ask questions, provide a perspective. And I learned a lot from that. I really did. I think we've got a lot of key kind of elements of that really kind of inspired me to then go on and put myself forward for the under 30 role. And of course, at the end of that role, I was actually technically eligible to run for it again, but chose, because there was an ordinary member role going separately, to allow somebody else to come in. Now, if I reduced the average age on trustee board by 5 to 10 years, you can imagine what two young members managed to do at that time. So I promised you some stats. So hopefully some of you in here would like to see some stats. Now, 5 CEOs, all the way through from Sir Michael Moore, Ruth Spellman, Stephen Tetlow, Dr. Colin Brown, who we met earlier at the annual meeting, and then Dr. Alice Button. Now, technically there's a 6th, because past President Bill Edgar stepped in between Ruth and Stephen for a short time, but that understanding those different levels of people that have that experience with has really been positive for me. 20 presidents, all the way through from Alec Osborne, all the way through to Dr. Clive Hickman, sitting at the back. I'm sure he'll be giving me a good update or review later on as to how well or badly this is going. Now, I didn't have an exact number of trustees, it has to be said, because, as you know, there's a reasonable turnover, but there's also a number of familiar faces that come up each year. Again, wide variety of experiences and knowledge and backgrounds. And again, not an exact number in terms of the number of meetings that I'm likely to have attended, let alone chaired, participated in. And these range from trustee board, council, qualification membership board, regional strategy board, etc., etc. So, there's some stats. So, my main thrust this year is around trust. Okay, so start off with a bit of a definition, and this will be a little bit wordy, this bit, because you can treat it as a noun or you can treat it as a verb. But fundamentally, in noun, you're looking at a firm belief in reliability, truth, or ability of something to have confidence in. And when you look at it as a verb, you're looking for relying on the truthfulness or evidence of something. So, why do we need to have trust? Well, fundamentally, we expect as trustees, as they're elected on the trustee board, to do the job to the best of their ability. So surely by kind of electing them, we would kind of automatically place our trust in them. But that's not always the way it kind of plays out necessarily, okay? And in my experience, and I will say this is my experience, trust within IMechE hasn't always been at the really high levels that we would hope for or expect. And what I would like to say is that there's a bit of a scenario here where you go off into your career, you are working hard, doing well, and you get nominated for trustee board. And that all counts for a lot, but at the point at which you've actually got your successful election to trustee board, that somewhat diminishes somewhat, okay? Essentially, you don't have that kind of level of trust anymore that you've built up in your normal career, which is a bit of a dichotomy, really. And I've experienced this a number of times, coming off trustee board, all of a sudden becoming a decent person again, going back onto trustee board, and all of a sudden not really kind of, okay, oh, he's back off actually, he's a decent person again. That's not what we want to be doing. That's not where we want to be, obviously. And the key for me is that when you become a trustee, you're automatically labelled as a trustee. You're not labelled as a member any longer, supposedly, even though we all are members, of course. So if I look back over the last, maybe 8-10 years ago, when I was on council, there's a particular strand or thought process that I have and a recollection. And what I'd like to do on this is use a little bit of US comedian Don McMillan's work, where he uses Venn diagrams and logic maps for his comedy. He's an ex-engineer, hence the link to him. Now, he did a logic map that looks a little bit like this. But he didn't do it with trustee board and council. He did it between him and his wife. Now, I'm brave, but I'm not necessarily that brave. Okay, so let's put that one to bed. But essentially, very simply, if one or other is right or wrong, you end up with a result coming out of it. Whether or not you do an AND gate or whether you do an OR gate, you'll get different views, different things coming out of it. Now, the really simple one is that if trustee board's got something wrong, but the council's got it right, obviously the council's got it right. It's a bit of a no-brainer. Now, things get a little bit more interesting at the next stage when you think, well, okay, we've now got a situation where both trustee board and council are right about something, but actually it's still council that's got it right. Okay, it's starting to get a bit interesting now. And it really gets quite interesting when you look at it and say, well, if you've got trustee board having it right, and council have still got it wrong, then actually council's still right. Again, not ideal. I can actually see the chair of council laughing his head off right now. I was a bit worried about this, actually. I should have run it past you, maybe, but never mind. And then it really gets quite interesting when you look where both of us are wrong. Actually, who is actually wrong? Now, Clive promised me a standing ovation at this point if I ever did this, so I'm hoping to see that later at some point, Clive, when that happens. But this is a snapshot of what my thoughts were in the past, okay? It's not where we are now, okay? I'm not here to try and offend anybody who's on council, who's been on council, etc. It's more the perceptions of council against trustee board, and it's down to this trust, is my kind of way of looking at it. So, what have we done so far to actually change stuff? You know, we've looked at greater transparency. So long time ago, probably 4 or 5 years ago, we had a lot of trustee board papers marked up strictly confidential, private, can't share it basically. And when I went on to council as a fellow, went on to CLC, Council Leadership Committee, and they were asking a lot of questions about certain topics. And I went back through my files on my computer, because it was over Teams at the time. I had all the answers in front of me, but I had the paperwork that said, strictly confidential, can't share it. Right, okay. So I admittedly, openly to the CLC, I said, look, okay, I've got the answer in front of me here, chaps and chapesses, but I can't strictly get, I'm going to go and ask if I can share this with you. What we've done is we've kind of unwound that, so there's only very few documents now that we actually have that strictly private and confidential marking on, so that we are able to share more information. So another thing we've done is to improve the visibility of information, especially when it comes to the finances. We've shared some of the more financial commercial data with a small group of members on council. So that's trustee board putting trust into the council in order to hopefully get it reflected back. And I think that is paying dividends as we kind of move forwards. Specifics, again, Dr. Clive Hickman and Dr. Richard Judge have done a huge amount of work, probably spanning back 3 or 4 years now, trying to get down into the weeds of the finances, better understanding, and get us into a sustainable situation. And to be fair, they've worked alongside a small number of council members as well, who are also knowledgeable in that area, hence getting the best of both worlds. It kind of got to the point where council thought because we weren't sharing the information there was something wrong, but in reality, trustee board, finance board and council were asking similar questions and just trying, and then we decided to work together better to move things forward. Now, it's always nice to have a meeting these days where we're not talking about the HQ. However, it's only right that I point out the work that Chris Boyle has done as a co-opted trustee. Initially, we were going through the RIBA stages, Royal Institution of British Architects stages, and actually we've moved across to the Government Green Book. And I think, you know, it's an old adage that I wind up my project managers with, which is, you know, we're the closest we've ever been to completing something. And I think after a kind of 10 or 12 years now, we really ought to be closer than we are, but we are getting much, much closer as we kind of move forwards. And we're trying to bring people along with us. Got a lot of external advice, strategic business case, outline business case, comes trustee board, and then we've got to make a decision on how we take that forward to the members. And I think some of the webinars where, no matter how long it took, Clive, Alice, Chris, Ben stayed online answering all the questions, not just cherry picking the questions that we wanted to answer and moving things forward in that sense. So, okay, so we've got Richard, we've got Clive, and we've got Chris. Matt, what have you done? It's an obvious question. Well, I've actually dedicated a lot of my time to Council Leadership Committee meetings over the last couple of years, attending at least 90–95% of them, hopefully trying to use my years on both Trustee Board and Council to assist the advice that CLC and the Council are trying to offer into Trustee Board and try and help it to land with trustees a bit better as we kind of move that forwards. I see Ben nodding, that's always useful. Make sure he's kind of confirming exactly what it is I'm trying to do here and build that bridge between Trustee Board and Council. At times it's been kind of a bit of a rope bridge. I think it's getting slightly stronger now. We're probably up to wood, not quite up to kind of concrete and steel yet, but we're working on it. So that's kind of a lot of internal stuff there. And, you know, we're often navel gaze rather than looking outwards. So how does this apply to the wider society? Now, Ipsos, for many years, have been doing a survey on the most trusted professions. And you look at this survey, you go, okay, so for the last 6 or 7 years, since engineering was added to the list, we've been in the top 5 or 6 each year as we've gone through. And there's about 20 or 25 to 30, as you see on the next slide. But obviously the survey is only as good as the information you put into it. So you do a little bit of due diligence and say, well, it's established in 1975, it's got 50 years, and they've got a lot of very happy customers. So they must be doing something right. And then you look at it and you say, well, okay, whereabouts on the scale do certain professions stand? And I'll go through that in a second. And I think we really just need to take stock of why that might be the case. So here's the index now. It's not going to be particularly large on screen, so apologies for that. But when I was doing my due diligence, my checks, it was kind of, well, okay, I expect kind of doctors and nurses to be near the top. And funny enough, that's exactly where they are. Government ministers, however, I'm expecting them to maybe not be at the top. Maybe not be at the top. And there they are down at number 2 from the bottom. So you look at this and you can pick out some other interesting bits and pieces as well. So, I mean, for last year, we're at number 2, which is one of the highest we've been. But also, you think, well, the police are only at 62%, which is only a couple of percent higher than the ordinary person on the street. And charity chief executives, clearly they've not met Alice, but clearly that's all the way down at 51. And business leaders, 36%. And obviously the government ministers at 15. So it's actually quite an interesting spread about how the public perceives this. And this is it's got a sample size of about 1,000 people. So whilst it's not a huge number of people that have been surveyed, it's got statistical significance. It does beg the question, though, if more engineers went into government, would these numbers change with the government ministers? Question mark. Or would they get tarred with the same brush? Interesting. So, why do we think this might be the case, or why do I think it might be the case? Well, fundamentally, and it kind of links into Clive's address from last year, where you've got the quote that essentially engineers are second to God, and anything that God didn't design, engineers have designed, essentially. So there's a good link back to last year as into my year. So whether it's a transport, whether it's infrastructure, communications, any domestic appliances, vehicles, etc., everything's been engineered, and people have a level of trust in that they've used it, it works, therefore they've got trust in it. And I think, obviously, food as well. You go off and buy something from the shop, there are certain standards that they have to have met, whether it be a bottled water, sandwich, whatever it might be. You buy it trusting that actually when you eat it, it's not going to do anything bad to you. So, vehicles, just to kind of focus in on that a little bit. Obviously in the UK there's a drive for electric vehicles from the government, and I think the key thing around the trust is whether you trust the technology. Because if you don't trust the technology, then there could be an issue. The technology won't necessarily be taken up. Now, I've kind of changed vehicles in the last 6 months or so, and I did try internal combustion, electric, etc., etc. Now, for my personal lifestyle, the electric didn't quite work out. So I've gone back, I've stuck with kind of ICE. But a number of people that I've spoken to have got both positive and negative views on electric vehicles. Those that have got negative views, it's more of a worry about range anxiety, depreciation, initial cost of purchase, etc., etc. Whereas those that extol the virtues of electric vehicles kind of saying, well, if you can charge from home and you've got solar panels, you're golden. And let's not forget the performance these things have, which will be close to my weekend car, being a Ferrari 360. But possibly even faster off the lights, in all fairness. So when you look at this and you think, well, okay, the charging capacity issues, you've got car issues, you've got people not necessarily trusting the technology, you've got stuff in the media that doesn't always kind of help us kind of move forwards in that sense. So for me, do I right here, right now, think that electric is the answer? I don't think it is. However, that's just my opinion. Okay, I actually kind of predict that hydrogen would probably come in and fill a bit of a gap until the technology actually gets to the point where it's more affordable and more achievable for people to be able to attain. Now, ultimately, I've been talking to you now for a little while, as you can imagine. None of you have fallen asleep yet, which is amazing. Opinions. Obviously, they all kind of, everything I've been talking to you about is based on my experiences, my biases, conscious and unconscious. And all we always know about the famous Bon mot who says, opinions are like a certain part of the human anatomy, and everybody's got an opinion. Now, there is an Australian comedian, Tim Minchin, who takes this one step further. And he's of the opinion, and I do agree with him, that actually opinions differ significantly from that part of the human anatomy, in that opinions should be regularly and thoroughly examined. So what do I mean by that? The key thing there is that we understand our biases, we understand where we've come from and our privileges, and we use that in order to say, well, okay, how is this affecting my opinion on something? Have I actually kind of taken my opinion, given it a bit of a beating with a stick, and understood why I have come to that opinion? Going back to the Young Members Board, I was privileged to attend their their strategy weekend in York recently, and they came to me with an idea that we're in the process of putting some meat on the bones of. And this is the President's Champions, where we're looking to develop future generations of engineers and align them with our purpose and strategy, get them to engage, give them opportunities to learn from our senior business team and leaders, and essentially tap into the knowledge and experience of our membership to help them. In a sense, kind of it reflects some of the help and advice that I've had all the way along the way. Now, it's in the early stages at the moment. It's likely we're going to try and run a pilot at some point during my year, but watch out for this as we kind of help to move this forwards. So, privilege, last but not least, for anybody who falls asleep. And yes, Simon, I was looking at you. So we've all everyone in this room will have benefited from certain privileges along the way during their lives, whether it's where you were born, what access to education you might have had, how you might have been helped along the way by parents, family, friends, and colleagues. So it's a huge topic, this. So what I'd rather do, rather than me kind of pontificate about it much further, what I would like to do is share a video with you, which will be about 3 or 4 minutes, and hopefully it'll give you an idea of what I kind of mean by privilege.
Everybody line up. Shoulder to shoulder. Take off your backpacks. Basketball, line up. We're about to race. Hey, we are racing for a $100 bill. The winner of this race will take this. It's a $100 bill. Before I say go, I'm going to make a couple statements. If those statements apply to you, I want you to take 2 steps forward. If those statements don't apply to you, I want you to stay right where you're at. Take 2 steps forward if both of your parents are still married. Take 2 steps forward if you grew up with a father figure in the home. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a private education. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a free tutor growing up. Take 2 steps forward if you've never had to worry about your cell phone being shut off. Take 2 steps forward if you've never had to help mom or dad with the bills. Take 2 steps forward if it wasn't because of your athletic ability, you don't have to pay for college. Take 2 steps forward if you never wondered where your next meal was going to come from. I want you guys up here in the front just to turn around and look. Every statement I've made has nothing to do with anything any of you have done. Has nothing to do with decisions you've made. Everything I have said has nothing to do with what you've done. We all know these people up here have a better opportunity to win this $100. Does that mean these people back here can't race? No. We would be foolish to not realize we've been given more opportunity. We don't want to recognize that we've been given a head start. But the reality is we have. Now, there's no excuse. They still got to run their race. You still got to run your race. But whoever wins this $100, I think it'd be extremely foolish of you not to utilize that and learn more about somebody else's story. Because the reality is, if this was a fair race and everybody was back on that line, I guarantee you some of these black dudes would smoke all of you. And it's only because you have this big of a head start that you're possibly going to win this race called life. That is a picture of life, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing you've done has put you in the lead that you're in right now. When I say go, on your mark, get set, go! If you didn't learn anything from this activity, you're a fool.
So, I think you agree with me that I saw some nodding faces around the heads, around the room, and I think you agree that that video is quite moving, quite poignant. So all I would say is, as I kind of finish up this address, at some point this evening, maybe it's over dinner, maybe it's whilst you're travelling back home, is maybe kind of reflect on some of your experiences, your privileges, biases, etc., and try and see, well, okay, how do they affect my opinions? And how does that then transpire and transpose into how people view your trustworthiness? So, thank you very much. I'll finish there.
Thank you, Matt, very much indeed. It's a really poignant video. I think, you know, many of us will have seen something similar, but many of us who was in the room earlier on for the AGM may also have noticed the link back to some of the discussion around the questions after AGM, so it's really, really neat. Now, you know what happens next. We're at that point of the evening. Open Q&A. I think, Matt, you're a pretty open book. There's no territory that we shouldn't go.
No,
I mean, I did reflect. I gave you a very generous introduction for all the hard work and altruistic effort you put into the Young Members Network. I think some people in the room are now thinking there might have been an ulterior motive, but we'll leave that.
Okay.
We'll leave that.
Okay. Nope.
Okay, so I've had a question come in online, so why don't I go there first? Thank you. This is from Timothy Podesta. Very engaging speech, thank you. Please explain the difference between council and trustees.
Ooh, okay.
There's going to be a range of views in the room,
yes,
but it's Matt's evening, so Matt gets to answer that question.
It probably starts with a 10-second history lesson, in the sense that council used to run the institution before 2002, I think it was. Then actually, with having such a large council, it's very difficult to get decisions made. So they decided to have a smaller group, formed a trustee board of 12 people elected, ordinary members, vice presidents, deputy presidents, president, and then council became more of an advisory committee. Okay, so we've had that for the last about 23 years, and it's still kind of evolving, this relationship. At times, like with some of the points I made, it's felt maybe a little bit them and us at times, and I think now we're starting to try and work together better, engage better, so that we're actually taking things to the membership, kind of standing shoulder to shoulder. And it's no great surprise, hopefully, that when we've been doing these webinars, it's been the president, the CEO, the chair of council, and the trustee, Chris O'Boyle, for the HQ stuff. That's been done purposely. And when we've been doing membership communications, the communication has been agreed by Ben as chair of council, Clive as president, and Alice as CEO. So again, standing shoulder to shoulder on things. Now, that doesn't mean there won't times when the shoulders start to part slightly. We have to try and work to try and get them back together again. That's all the art of the possible. But fundamentally, council is about 80-odd strong people, which representation from across the membership, provide advice into trustee board, and then the trustee board are the ones that kind of have the governance role, make the decisions. But key thing is actually have the accountability for those decisions as well. Hence things like liability insurance and things like that for directors and officers as such. So I hope that helps.
Thanks, Matt. I mean, what I would share is that I talk to lots of other CEOs across the sector on this point, and we all of us variously have bodies which are accountable and bodies which provide advice. And we spend quite a long time thinking about the best ways in which these can be constructed. Perhaps still work there. Super. We've had a couple more questions come in online, so I'm going to take those, but then heads up, I'm going to come back to the room. So first of all, from Christopher Hoare, how did we get to a position of such distrust between council and trustee board?
Well, I have to use some opinions again, aren't I? I think there are probably some decisions that a number of people on council wouldn't have agreed with or wouldn't have necessarily chosen that. I think it's probably quite important to acknowledge that trustees make decisions based on the information, that's kind of provided to them via external experts, etc. But it's also a point in moment in time. You know, occasionally we'll kind of make a decision, and there will be decisions that have been made that we've now unwound. You know, the buying of the companies, for example, the trading entities. A little bit difficult at the time, but they performed well initially, but then the performance dropped off. And now we've revised our strategy quite significantly. They're no longer part of our future plan. So we've done the divestment. Now, there will be people on council who will say, well, actually, you should never have bought them in the first place. But at the point in time with the strategy we had, they were the good ideas. One of the things we were actually trying to do was to emulate some of our friends over at the IET with some of the trading companies they had to try and boost the income for the institution. At the end of the day, it's not worked out that well for us. So we've changed tack. So I think that's where it comes from. I often hear, oh, okay, but all we're doing is making bad decisions left, right and centre. And to be perfectly honest, that's not always the case. You know, the pension decision we've made to try and move that forwards and kind of offload and move that forwards, that's a positive decision. Okay, and that will help this institution save probably close to £500,000 a year going forwards. Okay, so those are the kind of good decisions we want to highlight, but note the fact that there are going to be lessons learned from other decisions. And it's just that trust piece about acknowledging the issue, making the changes, making those changes known, rather than the kind of, oh, it's all in a confidential paper, therefore the secret squirrel situation kind of kicks in.
Thanks, Matt. And then finally online, and this is a question we've had in previous years from other members actually. It comes in this year from Carolyn Griffiths, who says, Matt, many thanks for your thoughtful presentation. My question is, when you reach the end of your term as a president, by what criteria will you judge whether the year has been a success for the institution's members?
You can see the trap coming a mile off, can't you, regarding the building? It's going to be the last 4 or 5 presidents that have actually said, well, the building decision will be made. You know, so I'm not necessarily going to fall into that trap. I'm going to say we're going to make significant progress, rather than say we're going to have had a vote and we'll have done whatever we're going to do with the building. Measuring this, I think there's work ongoing at the moment, actually, and I can see we've got Ruth Shelston as our newly elected Vice President working on a volunteer code of conduct, for example, something that will help us embed and enforce, to an extent, our behaviours, what we expect of people in committees, people on boards, etc. Just to give us that kind of ability to empower the chairs of those boards and committees to act whenever they see an example of poor behaviours. They can make a statement, they can get things organised, bring things back down, and if things repeatedly happen, then there's something there where, you know, there's an element of sanction there. I very much doubt that if somebody doesn't like somebody's tie, that they're going to lose their membership. But there are going to be things where people sometimes don't talk to each other in the way that we would expect them to, and we need to have something that would help us move things forward. So I'd very much like to have that sorted out. And as Carolyn will know, there's a number of kind of policies in the background that she's helping us with, as Clive thanked her for in the annual meeting earlier. And I think we would like to get that kind of closed out, so we've got a robust suite of policies kind of moving these things forward. In terms of getting out there and getting trustee board more visible, I would very much appreciate that sometimes we're seen as being in an ivory tower. and we're hardly ever seen. So encouraging people to get out to events like this, get out to the design challenges, etc., improving the visibility of trustees and getting the decision-making somewhat less opaque and more transparent. So whilst they're not kind of definitive measures of, I'm going to do A, B, and C, that's it, and these are the metrics, a little bit more general, again, not wanting to fall into the trap of previous presidents, but don't get me wrong, there's some real kind of teeth behind this that we want to try and make some improvements. And be open and honest. There are elements within our institution where the behaviours aren't where we want them to be, and that's what we need to try and fix.
Thanks, Matt. As forewarned, I'm going to come to the room now. In the usual way, please raise your hand if you have a question for Matt. And please hold on for just a moment, John, while the microphone comes to you. So probably easiest. Oh, yeah, okay. pass the parcel with the microphone.
Thank you, Matt. It's John Lowe, fellow and various backgrounds. I have two buttons to press. One I just mentioned because it doesn't need pressing, because I know that you are, with your volunteering efforts, it doesn't need more emphasis, and that's education, STEM education for young people. But the other one is that I believe that you also embrace that we are no longer a UK organisation with overseas branches. We are an international body. I draw the comparison with the Society for Automotive Engineers, SAE, and we have, 30% of international, and our future ought to be, and I believe this is embraced, as an international organisation. Could you please tell us what specific plans you hope will happen in your presidency to move us so we can be recognised as a global body which happens to have UK roots?
Okay, thank you, John. Always trust you to have the nice, difficult questions. There is work going on in the background through the Qualification Membership Board and into the staff with the membership committees, where the volunteer proposition is kind of being looked at. And part of that is kind of understanding, well, okay, different areas of the world, if we're trying to increase membership in certain areas, we've got to acknowledge that actually the affordability of our fees differs depending on where you might be located. So that's one element that we want to try and kind of bottom out, so that we feel we can get more members in certain areas, actually make it slightly more affordable too. I think obviously we've got 30 to 35% of our membership that's international, which means we've got 65% that sits in the UK. We need to make sure we're kind of getting the value out of the international investment, if that makes sense. So I know we've had various strategies in the past where we've put staff into certain areas and they've not necessarily worked out as well as we'd hoped. So I think I would like the International Strategy Board would be the key element to provide advice into trustee boards of what they see we need to do. Whether any of that work would involve any kind of decoupling of membership with kind of professional registration or not, whether that would help overseas or not, whether it would help in this country or not. I know the IT have gone down that route previously, so there's a bit of a model there that we could have a look at. So I'm hoping to go to the Oceania region later this year. So Singapore, New Zealand, Australia is the plan. Obviously plans can change, but fundamentally we do value our international members, especially through NOMCO. Some of the tasks that I've been assisting with for interviews have been very insistent around making sure we're getting the high quality of international members onto trustee board and other boards and committees. So we are committed to the international membership, but the initial strategy, the actual strategy we're running to at the moment is under development, I would suggest. I would hope that would improve, obviously.
Yeah, it's a really good question, John. And of course, there's many different ways that we can support our international community. I talked about collaboration earlier on. I'm slightly eyeballing my fellow CEOs in the front here, because I think this is absolutely an area where the PEI community can work together with the Engineering Council to enable things like mutual recognition and help the mobility of our engineering community. I think it's really important, more than ever. Super. Any more questions in the room? Ollie, if you just would wait for the microphone. And you were going to do that anyway, I know.
Good evening. Hi. Immediate past chair of the YMB as of today. Thank you for your mention of the strategy weekend, and thank you again for joining us. You've done an incredible amount of volunteering for the institution. I'd be intrigued to hear sort of what's driven you, and what would be something that you'd like to say to the volunteers of the institution, perhaps to drive them or inspire them.
Okay, that's a good question. I mean, to be fair, it's a question I'm asked more often by my fellow contractors, because it's not normally something that a contractor would do, give up free time, etc., when they could be going out and earning a crust. I think, in my mind, having been on and off trustee board for quite some time, and council, I've learnt a lot, and it's not something I would normally have learnt in my usual kind of day-to-day career. And that's allowed me to kind of branch off into different things, maybe become a more rounded engineer, not just in terms of kind of ability, but obviously shape. But fundamentally, joking aside, it is that kind of giving back element. I've benefited a lot from these things, and I think there's a lot of people have got to give. There's this kind of common skills, interchangeable skills, as we would call it, and you'll have known from kind of chairing the Young Members Board. You get that kind of knowledge experience, you're driving strategies, you're getting into those kind of discussions, which typically in most companies are you kind of middle management, upper management kind of levels. So you're getting a dose of that early on. It is a little bit strange also that typically between the ages of 35 and 55, volunteering effort drops off because people go away, have careers, have families, etc. And it's really kind of good to see that people, like myself, I'm going to say it again, say Ruth, I'm going to say Giles as well, they've all kind of been volunteering for a long time, virtually as long as I have. Okay, so they deserve their recognition as well. And they obviously see some benefit in doing so. So it's a case of identify something you'd like to do, ask to try and see what opportunities are available, and put as much effort into it as you wish to put into it, because you'll always get more out of it, especially in your first 5 or 10 years of volunteering. You get far more out of it than you'll ever put back in again, and then you've got the opportunity to reverse that later on.
The hands are going up now. I was about to say we've got time for one more.
They're breeding.
Peter, do you go ahead, and then I'll come
Peter
back.
Flynn.
Hi, Peter.
136 out of 140, I think, is the arithmetic. Matt, you rightly and encouragingly pointed out that engineers come somewhere between fourth and second in the sort of trust table. But at the same time, society, we believe, does not have a very good understanding of what engineering is all about. In fact, I'm looking around now at people in the room whose job it is to improve that situation. So I just wondered how you sort of squared those two apparently opposing situations.
Yes. Another interesting question, because I recall back at kind of school days, the most popular mechanical engineer at the time was the mechanic of one of the soap operas on TV, which wasn't really quite what we thought the mechanical engineer would be. So you're going to have that. I think there's probably more awareness about engineering now in terms of the advances in technology are probably a little bit more obvious to some of us now compared to kind of 20 or 30 years ago. The advent of the internet, the development of the mobile phone and touch screens, etc. So I think people are understanding that these things don't just kind of come out of free air. We've got some really clever people doing the designs and working these things through. But that's not to say there won't be people out there that don't really fully understand engineering. You look over to other countries such as Germany, they protected the term engineering, whereas we haven't in this country. So you just as like to see engineering on the side of a civil construction van in the UK as you are kind of to see anything else. So it's It's a difficult question, and I think it's a difficult one to square. So without knowing the 1,000 people that were asked the question and what kind of their backgrounds were, whereabouts they had kind of heard of engineering and what they thought engineering was, yeah, I mean, most people will have experienced a doctor. Not many people set up an appointment to meet an engineer, in all fairness. So maybe it's some of those things, but actually pushing outwards. And again, we've had 4 or 5 years of kind of contemplating our navel to an extent, very much inward facing. And I think it's time that we now start looking a bit more outward facing to try and help that and help the understanding. And hopefully it stays at the top by us doing that.
Thank you, Matt. I am aware there's more questions in the room. There's more questions online as well, so I am being fair as I draw us to a close because we're slightly running behind time now.
Sure. Well, just one point, actually. If people would like to write their questions down, and we've got the online ones, I'm more than happy to provide responses separately.
Very good. I was going to put you on the hook for the networking reception downstairs in a minute as well. But we'll come to that all in good time, because now we would like to offer you the usual vote of thanks. And I think I'm looking to Nikki for that.
Good evening, everyone. I'm, as of today, the chair of the Young Members Board, taking over from Dr. Ollie Joris. Thank you. Now, I can imagine what some of you are wondering. Did I meet my partner through the Young Members Board? The answer is not yet. So I wanted to go back to that definition of trust that Matt went through there. So trust is the attitude or belief that an agent or someone will help you in an environment categorized by complexity and uncertainty. Matt, you are now trusted with the leadership of this organization, this institution, and I'm not going to comment on the complexity and uncertainty associated with the IMechE. But that definition implies a level of vulnerability. Every time we trust someone or something, we make ourselves vulnerable to them. In front of this distinguished audience, I can certainly say that I'm feeling vulnerable. I trust you. Today, that's not a feeling I'm unused to, trusting a broad group of engineers. Today, I stepped onto a Great Western Railway train to get from Chippenham to London, and I trusted the Great Western Railway to get me here. I trusted the engineers. Last time I stepped on a plane, I trusted the engineers who designed and manufactured that aircraft. And the institution tonight has trusted me with this vote of thanks. But society makes itself uniquely vulnerable to engineers in a way that very few other professions can claim. And I would surmise that society trusts engineers broadly because it has to in order to function. Tonight, Matt, the electorate have voted for you to become the president of this institution. Therefore, it trusts you with the leadership of this organisation, the membership. Thank you very much for your speech. I really look forward to working with you, particularly on the young member initiatives, and I thank you for highlighting that. I'd like to thank the staff members that have put this together, not just tonight, but for everything that you do to empower volunteers and the members, always. And thank you to the attendees for attending tonight. Thank you.
And thank you, Nikki. Our trust was well placed. That draws us to the conclusion of events here in the lecture theatre. So I will need to say goodbye to colleagues who have joined online. Thank you very much for your engagement this evening. I hope you spotted there was a preview of a number of events taking place this year. We could probably bring that slide back, or I could do what I was asked to do, which is read it out. So drawing your attention in particular to the Sir Hugh Ford Management Lecture in Manchester on the 23rd of July and the institution's annual dinner hosted by Matt at the Boiler Shop in Newcastle on the 27th of November, and other events too. So with that, for everyone in the room, please, if you're able to, do join us downstairs for a networking opportunity back down in the Marble Hall where we started off. Thank you very much indeed.